Hello, I'm Charlie Gonzalez, and I'm sitting here with Axios writer and former Cal State University Northridge journalism instructor, Kyle Stokes. Thank you for joining me today.
Good to be here, Charlie.
How does it feel to be back here? You were last here
gosh.
about almost 2 years ago. That was your last time you taught a semester here.
Just like coming home, man. It's great to be back and to see so many familiar people, and the people, who are working to support the students here are just wonderful people, and so it's nice to see them again as well.
Yeah. And so we were talking before we went on. You grew up in Minnesota and went to University of Missouri.
That's right.
And now you're working back in Minnesota for Axios. Kind of tell us about what it was like to grow up in the land of 10,000 lakes and how the sports teams are doing, as we were talking a little bit about that.
Well, I'm a big hockey fan, so the Wild are doing well this year, which is a real joy. I fell out. The Vikings are better, but I fell out of love with them as a very small boy when Gary Anderson missed a field goal that basically, caused the Vikings to miss the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl 33. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was traumatic, and basically after that, I hung on for like a year or two more, but they keep breaking your heart. I mean, being a Minnesota sports fan is about heartbreak. So that was not a great part about growing up there. What I loved about growing up there, though, was that I was, and especially now having kind of gone on a journey through the journalism world, I grew up with some of the best local news anywhere in the country. And I say that having lived in a bunch of different places with a lot of with good news ecosystems and bad news ecosystems, and I know that it had one of the best regional newspapers in the country. It had a lot of really strong television stations that still do some really good storytelling, and are kind of like beacons for the craft. It's an epicenter of the public radio world, which is a part of journalism that I spent a lot of my career in so far. It's just, so growing up there, it really set the stage, and I can't remember a time when I didn't want to be a journalist, and I think it's because I was growing up around such good journalism.
And so, you talked about your childhood in Minnesota and everything that grasped your interest about the field of journalism, and what drew you to University of Missouri?
Yeah, they have I knew that I wanted to be a television reporter. Like, that was my coming out of high school. That was my conception of what my career was going to be. I knew I wanted to be on TV. And so when I went on a college tour, I went to a couple different schools, but when they take you out to their television station they run the NBC station in a small town in central Missouri, and they put you in the studio and they put you in a lawn chair, and they're like, watch us do the news. And the people who are doing the news, they're professional anchors on the weekdays, but there are also students who are doing the nuts and bolts work. They're producing the shows, they're reporting stories, they're on camera, they're behind the camera. And I was like, that's it. Like, this is a great school. And so when it came down to making my decision, it was an easy choice. And because I knew that TV was what I wanted to do, I also knew that they had a public radio station, and I was very interested in that because I was just listening to a lot of it as a high schooler. And so I was attracted to the ability to have to do hands-on work. Yeah. And I think that's this is for better or for worse, the journalism industry is a learn by doing industry. And so I was attracted to the opportunity to learn by doing.
And what aspect of journalism while you were there did you focus on? Was it like community? Was it the sports journalism, following their athletics? Tell me about that. Which area that you were attracted towards?
Yeah, I pretty much knew I wanted to be a news reporter. Like, I was not, I'm a sports fan, but I wasn't interested in covering it. Yeah. I also knew that I didn't want to be behind the camera. I actually tried it for a semester of news. They have a news producing class, and that was just like, it was, I'm good at a lot of things, and producing television newscasts is not one of them. Ask some of the anchors about the shows that melted down under my under my watch. I always knew that I wanted to be a reporter. And I think the thing that I liked about that was the ability, if you're a news producer, you're focusing on a lot of things at once.
Yeah.
But as a reporter, you're drilling down and becoming as expert as you can on one story in a day. How much ever time you have before your deadline, you drill down and I like that task.
Yeah.
And so I knew from, like my college experience confirmed, like, you're a news guy and you're a reporter. You're not a producer, you're a reporter.
Yeah, and that's just certainly what my instructor here kind of emphasized with us as we rotate roles every few weeks. He wants us to get as much experience in every role in the newsroom as possible. And your first job after college was in Indiana. And to kind of tell us a little bit about that and how you got that gig.
Yeah. Well, so I mentioned I wanted to go into TV, and I think I had a couple of experiences during my collegiate years.
Yeah.
That basically affirmed to me that maybe TV is not the role for me. And it's not that I didn't have some skill at it. Like, I think I'm technically proficient in everything, and I'm comfortable enough being on camera. The problems that I was having was, like, I don't know if they were interested in the kind of storytelling I was interested in. Like I'm like a big nerd about how government works and public policy. And I remember going on this fake job interview before I got out of school. That was, it was like we were on a trip with the RTDNA club, and went to a TV station in Northwest Arkansas, and the news director asked me, like, what kind of stories do you want to do? I said public policy, and she was like, ooh, I don't know about that. Like, she just
it just won't attract the audience. It won't bring in the ratings.
Yeah, or just we do different things. We do public safety stories. We cover things that are, and it's not to say that that's not important. It's just not the work that I wanted to do. And I knew from working at the public radio side of from the public radio station at Mizzou that, like, I had some skill at that as well and was interested in it. So I was like, this is what I want to pursue.
Yeah.
A former instructor at Mizzou had gone and started a new job for herself in Indiana, and she kind of poached me is what ended up happening. And I got really lucky in my first job. I don't know how as a new reporter, to get the job that I got in Indiana, which is to go and be a reporter on education statewide. Like, I covered education, and that's basically what I did for the next 10 years of my career. And like, this job was not only good because I was covering a beat, which is not something that you always get to do straight out of school, but it was also great because it came with a lot of on-the-job training in both like how to do radio stories in an interesting way, but especially in digital strategy, how to write a blog. Like, at the time, blogs were the big thing. So we were writing daily content on the web as well. Instead of just print. Right. Yeah.
And broadcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a totally different style, and it requires you to think about who is your audience and who are you making this for? How do you make content that serves, a broad radio audience, like a general interest audience, versus a specific audience? In our case, probably like super users of education news, like a teacher or like a really involved parent.
Yeah.
And thinking about how to do those things at once. That was really interesting, and that was why I say I just got really lucky going to Indiana. And I think that that's something that you, as that aspiring journalist, should be thinking about. Like, who am I making this content for, and am I telling the right kind of story for the people who are actually consuming the content I'm creating, especially if you're not doing work for just a television news station. Exactly. Who is your audience? Thinking about that.
I think the medium as well, you touched upon a really important subject, how who am I writing this for, and is this how most people consume their news? I think personally for me, news articles online, I consume the most, and I think I speak for people in my age range, like mid-20s, they would prefer to get that online. It's quick, it's on their phone, they don't have to like open up a newspaper and unfold it and fold the right way and then crumple it up, or they don't have to tune into a TV while they're in the middle of something. It could be distracting. It's the easiest way. And even like teachers now, for the most part, when they want to show something to the class, they use an online article, they use a blog, as long as it's from a reliable source.
Yeah. And and the video content that you're probably seeing that I'm seeing on a daily basis. Like, I don't have cable television at home. I don't have, so like, I don't even know if I could, I can watch local news via a streaming service, but I'm watching most of the video content in my life on Instagram and on TikTok and on YouTube. And so like that's totally different from when I was growing up. And news articles as well, like thinking about how much of this news article, this sort of written in, inverted pyramid style, how much is the audience really consuming of this content? That's a thing that I've been thinking about a lot, just like how much, because the reality is, and research shows, it's the top 4 paragraphs and then people start skimming. That's the amount of time that people have in your news article. And I think that's a big challenge for the industry.
I think that's it's a good life lesson in general that I hear a lot, how when you write something, especially when you're applying for a job, you want to keep the most important stuff and keep it short. So, like for managers, hiring managers, employers, and also that goes for consumers as well, who don't always have the attention span or the time to read an entire article. I know personally for me, there during some big investigative journalism articles, especially during the Trump administration, that went on for pages and pages and pages. And I remember like making a mental like bookmark of like where I left off, and it took me like an entire day to read everything because of all the details and months and time it would put into it. And so even for a smaller article about teaching or about a business and market watch, that can stray someone's attention real fast, or their attention can go away real fast. How do you get them to read the most important bits and get what you want them to out of it?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We're skipping ahead to to the job I'm in now, because that's what the job I'm in now is all about. I would say that in general, I guess the thing that if you're working for most news organizations where you're making you're writing a story in the kind of traditional style, if you're making a television news story, if you're making even a radio story, and radio stories, just like TV, have to be written pretty short. I just want to say that in general, one of the hardest early lessons of my career, and I think this came out of my experience in Indiana, where like I was, this young reporter being set loose on a beat and learning, man, this is really complicated. Like policy is really complicated.
Yeah, it is.
And wanting to convey all of that nuance and difficulty about implementing a policy that may be well-intentioned, like trying to get, like I remember doing like lots of stories about trying to open up the teaching profession to people beyond just, like traditional education school graduates. This was a big push at the time.
Yeah.
Thinking but like looking back on a lot of that content, how much were people really absorbing? Learning to have a relationship with the nuances of your story, but then like really doing the work for your audience, on your audience's behalf, without becoming opinionated, without stilting or slanting your story one way or another. That's the crux of the challenge of journalism. To skip ahead, and I won't spoil the ending, but like my new job is like working for a news organization that is all about solving the attention span problem. But I think that anyone can learn the lesson that you've got to figure out, you've got to do the work for your audience, because your audience doesn't have much brain bandwidth to devote to absorbing your content, and you've got to consider that while you're making it.
And also with policy, especially if you stay with that profession or area of expertise in multiple different states, it's almost like you start over, because like policy in Indiana is not the same as policy in Minnesota or Missouri or anywhere else.
Or California.
And so you kind of have to take time studying that, and then cater to your audience's interests. Like, okay, this policy is different here. Here are the laws. Here's like their average salary, and here's where it's going to go in the future. And that's, I think, the difficult part that you seem to have mastered while in Indiana. It's not so much as going to cover the same sport in another state where the rules are the same. Policy is different everywhere, because each state has its own power and its own territory. And what was the quickest way to adapt in that sense, to where you're covering a subject that's different everywhere?
I moved to Seattle from Indiana, and I had a lot of background knowledge in Indiana covering education. I was an education reporter in Seattle too, and then I covered education in Los Angeles as well, and that was 11 years of my career. And yeah, you do develop kind of like a foundation of knowledge about the topic that I covered for so long. But what's the secret? There is no secret. It's hard work. You've just got to go out and you got to do the reporting. There's only so much that you can learn as a reporter from the Google. You've got to go out and call people. You got to see how things are working on the ground. It's the question is basic. The way I think of your question is like the essence of being a beat reporter is the same everywhere. You start going to the meetings where decisions are getting made. You start talking to the people who those decisions are affecting. You don't just look for the people who are looking for the television cameras and for the microphones. You look for the people who don't know where the microphones and the television cameras are. Don't have the access to the resources to know that journalism is affecting the public policy that's shaping their lives. You start looking for them. The nuts and bolts of that are the same everywhere. And you say I've mastered it. I don't know. I'm trying.
You're certainly better than
we're all
me.
still learning.
Yeah, well, you're certainly better than me at it. That's for sure. And most people here. But and you're talking about like going to those places where they're at. Like city halls and like public like community meetings where these like public representatives, like even like as small as commissioners to mayors to all these different levels, to people who want to get into your field, talk a little bit about what it takes to go in there and show your credentials and just to be comfortable in that situation as a student, as opposed to someone who graduated and is looking for work and is kind of like falling behind, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of people ask this question of like, how do you get comfortable in that space? How do you find stories in that environment? And the truth is that I think people worry about that more before it's their job.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's hard to conceive of this as a student. How am I supposed to? When I was teaching here, a lot of people, wondered, how do I go out and find good stories that I want to tell, that I'll feel proud to put out there? And I think my feeling is you just have to trust that this is one of the things that's going to work itself out when you're able to get the job.
Yeah.
When you have to go out and start doing it, hopefully you'll have good editors that are pointing you in the right direction, good editors that are prompting you to ask the right questions. That's certainly something you should be looking for when you're looking for a job, when you're going out on your job interviews and asking the editor, okay, what do you want your reporters to be doing? That's a great question you can be asking on job interviews. But once you get the job, once you've been given your assignment, once you've been given your marching orders, that part takes care of itself. And it's hard to explain because you just sort of start going and you start going through the motions. You start writing stories. You maybe don't do as great a job on your first story, but that inspires an email from someone who writes you and is like, I think you really missed an important aspect of this story. Let me tell you about it. Yeah. And then you start talking to them and you keep an open mind. You don't get defensive. You remain an open vessel and for your sources to come in and feed you new information. And like that part is not the hard part of being a beat reporter. The hard part of being a beat reporter is figuring out how to triage your time telling so many different stories.
Yeah.
Because when you're there, when you're showing up, when you see what's going on, the difficult part is taking the time to tell each of those stories well.
And I think, I wanted to add on to that because I remember taking a class here where we did have to go to a city hall, kind of for a public report. I forget exactly what it was. And in that class, there was a situation one of my classmates brought up that actually made it on nightly news, and the rest were just local stories like county sheriff like crime reports and certain things like honoring the family of a kid who passed away from cancer, and they were going to like make some sort of reward or event in their favor, and things like that don't always appeal to a nationwide audience that you're trying to reach. But the one that did was extremely funny. It was sort of a scandal, and that sort of aspect where you want to provide all this info for a community that probably doesn't care.
Yeah.
That aspect for you have found a way. Not so much around it, but just to enhance their interest, because Axios wouldn't exist without its subscribers where you're at right now. So you have their attention, and as you said, you're trying to find a way to solve that problem, their lack of attention, and to get to care more about these smaller issues that on a grand scale maybe don't affect their everyday lives, but on a small scale in their future very well could.
Yeah. And sometimes, sometimes the most interesting thing that happens at a public meeting is not the thing that ends up getting a story written about it too. At the city hall, at the city council that I cover most, the things actually the thing that I find most fascinating are the times when they get appealed to from someone who, it's it's like an abandoned house and it's against city code to live in an abandoned house, but then the person who's living there calls the city and says, it's not abandoned, I'm living here. It's just that they never willed the property to me. Please don't kick me out. I don't have anywhere to go. Those are, that's not a news story per se, but it's interesting and it affects, it's a reminder that it affects real people's lives, I suppose.
And every local story we see on the news, whether it's fun or not, or even something on the nightly news, that is brought up in every city hall and every city council, but we only see it from the outside because it's on the nightly news, and those small things that don't make it on prime time with ABC News with David Muir or with Lester Holt or something, those can have smaller effects. We just tune them out because we are so obsessed or preoccupied with our own lives. It's kind of like an inherently selfish trait that we have.
And that's the challenge of this job too. Is I think part of you will spend, if you go into the same profession I have, which is local news, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to get people to care about the topics that are important. But people don't spend a lot of time caring about the finer points of city policy or what's going on at the school board. You might, if you are an involved parent, in the school context, I'm thinking about school board type politics and stuff like that. Maybe if you're an involved parent, you're going to care. But a lot of things come back to very basic questions, if in the school context, where am I going to send my kid to school, and are they going to be safe when they go there? Are they going to have a teacher who emails me back? Are they going to have a teacher that shows up to parent-teacher conferences? All of these things are way more the kind of the nuts and bolts of a parent's experience of their relationship with their government. But there are things that are going on at the school board that are affecting them and do affect the way that the system works. And so the challenge that every reporter faces is making that interesting and making that case in the story that they're writing. And that's part of the it's part of the challenge. But it's also, I think it's super fun.
And also that kind of works its way into, because we just had election season, propositions and smaller laws that are on the ballot that people may just quickly read and skim over. Those also
judges.
Yeah, exactly. Those also get into people's lives in a way where so much reporting doesn't. But do you ever published a guide or help write a guide to each proposition, and here are the risks, here are the benefits, and everything? Do you ever do stuff like that?
Yeah, no, that's part of the gig. I did that a lot at LAist when I was working there. That was my job when I was working in Los Angeles. That was a big part of my job, and I hosted city school board election forums and things like this. So that was that's part of my job.
Transitioning to CSUN, a place where you used to work and now you're back here visiting the campus, what do you think the students here should take from this interview and everything that you've said about what it takes to get people interested in public policy and paying attention to this?
Yeah, I hope that you stick with it. I think it's a really important job. I think that it's both an uncertain time right now in the journalism industry because the way that people consume both news and just digital media in general is completely changing. The company that I work for now is called Axios, and Axios, my job is to write a local newsletter that covers the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, where I live. So it's to cover both news and culture and food and business and sports. And that all gets balled into one email newsletter that comes every day. And one of the things that the people that run our company talk about is that the competition for, and this is true not just for us, and so this is like a universal lesson, I think. What the people who run Axios say is that our competition is not just the newspaper and not just the television stations or the public radio stations. The competition is Tinder. The competition is whatever is on your phone that is going to divert your attention away from our newsletter or our news story or our app. And you know, so like that's a thing that I think everyone needs to be thinking about. When I talk about people will, you know, on a traditional news story, people read the first 4 graphs and then start skimming. You know, that's, you know, part of what Axios is founded on is the idea that we have to write news stories in a different way to keep people's attention. But I think that in general, I think that that's like, that's something you've got to keep in mind, is that you are up against really tough competition. People who, you know, in you know, Silicon Valley companies that make a lot of money by knowing how to hold their users' attention. And so in that context, I don't know that anyone knows exactly how to deliver news and information. That means that the old ways of doing business are all getting upended, and that is both very scary. It makes for an uncertain environment for a CSUN student coming into this profession at this time. It's also very exciting because we haven't invented the way that people are going to deliver essential news, and like we talk about making people care about local news stories. I think that we're watching people in this moment invent ways to get their communities to care about the important public policy developments that are affecting them. And I think that what will never change at the heart of that is the business of journalism, the essentials of going out and being a transparent observer, open to all sides, open to all different types of to all different perspectives and viewpoints, endlessly curious, trying to verify that the information they're learning is true. How radical an idea that is in this time especially. That is always going to be essential to making trustworthy content, whether it appears on television news, on a radio station, in a newspaper, or fill in the blank. So I mean, my message to people at CSUN is to remember those basics, to remember the essentials of journalism, because those will never change. And
it's also important to know that it doesn't just fall on the burden of the reporters and the people writing these companies. There also has to be some sort of inner interest or responsibility on the consumer to want to know this, because my instructor said something very interesting, is that it's easier to teach someone who wants to know but doesn't than someone who knows and just isn't interested. And so it's also falls on the consumer to care a little bit, because you're doing everything you can short of mind controlling them, basically, to get them to, you force them to read, you know, like I'm Professor X or something. I just put that to my head.
I think
you know,
there's truth to that, and I don't deny it. I just don't think that my job as a journalist is to tell people that it's their fault, you know, and to blame them. I mean, I think the difficulty here is that there is undoubtedly a news literacy challenge, because we're seeing how people fall for misinformation. That I think I look at it and it's just, this is obviously not credible. This does not, you know, like this URL alone, you know, like, you know, msnbc.biz is not really, you know, I'm just making this up. But I mean, people do not understand that. Now, I think in that environment, it is not journalists' job to you know, I think it's our job in that environment to lean in.
Not so much to say that, hey, you're wrong for not taking us seriously, just on the sense that, you know, we're putting this information out there for you so you can be informed. It is now your responsibility to do with that as you may. Take it in, or you can ignore it. If you're still claiming these things that we've gone out and given to you, if you're still claiming that, no, these things don't exist or they're wrong, that goes beyond us. That's now that's the ball's now in your court.
I think it's our job to work on creating the best content possible. I think that it is. I hope that journalists can be part of the solution when it comes to combating misinformation. You know, I don't think that the thing I want to avoid doing is is blaming people or saying, well, it's not my job that they don't understand, what I'm putting out there, or that they think that I'm full of it because there's so much of people who are full of it on my news feeds right now. Like, I don't think I want to avoid that outcome. I think part of the ways that journalists can lean in is to make yourself appear human in public.
Yeah.
Like, have social media accounts where you respond to people who have good faith objections to stories that you write. Just the other week, on my X account, I sent out I said, look, I made a mistake in a story that I wrote. This was last week. And I wrote, look, I'm sorry, this wasn't my best work. I've went back and checked my facts. We've corrected the story. But I basically, I didn't just put that, invisibly on the bottom of the story without, I also said, hey, look, I messed up. I'm sorry. Those kinds of moments, I think, really go a long way. And I do think that people get really, I think there's an instinct to push back on engaging with the quote unquote, the trolls on the internet. And I do think that, like, showing people that we're human beings is an important step. It's not just on social media. Every time that we get an email after we send out a newsletter with a story that someone doesn't particularly like for whatever reason, when we respond, and I've heard this from journalists inside and outside my current news organization. This is like usually, there are people who are writing to you because they're angry but I think the ones who write back, and I'm often surprised by how often when I give a human, level-headed, non-emotional response, that I get a response back that's just like, okay, thank you so much for responding. I appreciate you engaging with me and just letting me know how you do your job, even if we don't agree about how good the story was at the end of the day.
Yeah. Or if it fits their worldview.
Well, right, yeah. Right, and which is often, this is part of the news literacy challenge, is I do think that people have an expectation that journalists are to be performative in the direction of your ideology, that we're supposed to interview people and make elected officials, either squirm or give them a platform, based on like weed on us. And there's a place for challenging people with power, but I think there's also like an extent to which people want that challenge to match up with their ideology.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge in this time is to remember that our job is to learn things from public officials, to get public officials to, especially in a forum like this on live television, it's not to dance on their heads and pound them into submission over ideological differences. It's to get them to reveal things that they're not willing to reveal publicly.
Yeah.
That's our job, is to try and learn things that aren't meant to be public. And I think that's one of those areas where I think it just requires us to be very clear-headed about what our job is as journalists.
I want to pivot back because you're born and raised in Minnesota. Now that's where now you're back to where you started, and you were talking about how you fell out of love with the Minnesota Vikings after that 1998 NFC Championship against the Falcons.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, because I see a lot of really some similarities in one player in particular, Justin Jefferson, and when you compare him to Randy Moss, the stats that they put up so early in their career. The dude's incredible, and I'm sure you enjoy watching him.
No, I don't. I don't watch the Vikings at all.
You don't? Oh man, I could say this. I could say this. I was at the Vikings and Rams Thursday night game a couple of weeks ago. The one with the infamous no call on the face mask on Sam Darnold by Byron Young. Justin Jefferson catches a pass like this, and he's not even looking at the ball. There's nothing he can't do. It's like every time he makes a big reception, no one's covering him. I'm like, I'm not even surprised. I'm not even mad anymore. It's just like no one can guard this guy. What would it take for the Vikings, for you to start watching the Vikings again? Because they're second place in the division. They're probably going to make the playoffs. No one thought they would be this good with the backups, the quarterback Sam Darnold after their first round pick, J.J. McCarthy, went out for the season.
Yeah.
Like what would it take, someone who's living there, who grew up a Vikings fan, to get you back into the fold and watch?
Playoff success. I'm a pure bandwagoner, and I don't make any bones about it. I'm 100% a bandwagon guy on the Vikings. If they make it a deep playoff run, I will be there at the parade. But like the championship in Minnesota I'm holding out for is a Stanley Cup. So but like I've just football is not my sport, and that's fine, and I've just learned to accept that about myself. And I know that means that I've kind of shut myself out. Like I know that everybody's a football fan. It's a football town, really.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, I mean, hockey is part of the like fabric of everyday life. But I think if you ask people where their sports loyalties lie, most Minnesotans would probably say they're Vikings fans more than any other team in town. So But
and
yeah,
I know some Vikings fans that can go back to the days of early Fran Tarkenton's first stint with the team before he went to the Giants and then came back under Bud Grant. Minnesota has the most postseason losses of any franchise, and they have the highest winning percentage of any team that doesn't have a Super Bowl win.
Yeah.
And so Vikings fans have been through it all. They've been through the highs, they've been through the lows, and do you ever talk? I know you don't watch them, but as on your job, do you ever talk with any sports writers about Minnesota sports teams?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. My job before, I was like a very like beat-driven guy.
Yeah.
But part of our newsletter is actually we're trying to do a newsletter that has a full, complete meal. Vegetables and dessert. And
figuratively and literally.
Yeah, and and literally because sometimes we cover food, but like and that's a change. And I think what I am excited about with the job that I have now is that I get to kind of explore my broader interests. Like covering sports. Like I've actually, like one of the stories that I had most fun doing this year was, going to a Minnesota Wild, the opener for the Minnesota Wild, which also happened to be a team. The Columbus Blue Jackets were in town, and their star player died in the off season. It was very tragic. So I was there to cover the memorials that were there, and found some very interesting stories that were happening in the bowl, the arena bowl, not in the seating sections. I mean, like not in the, not on the. I wasn't there to cover the game itself.
Yeah.
And like that's been super fun. And like the crux of my job is to go find vegetables, like to write about what's happening at the city council that day. And my co-writers are very accomplished business reporters and a state capitol reporter. But yeah, my job now is also to write about sports. Like I wrote a story about like why the Wild have one of the league's best records to start this year. And I think there's a lesson in there for people who are, it's ironic that I started out this interview by talking about how I knew I was a reporter. I knew I wanted to focus on one thing. My job is a lot more like a producer's job now, like a television producer, where it's broad range of interests. And because our readers are complete people. They're not coming to us because they are only interested in city council news or they're only interested in state capitol news. Among the most read things in my newsletter is at the very end, each of the three writers that day we call it just an outro where we say Kyle is watching such and such television show, or Kyle is going to visit Los Angeles. And I know people are the thing that's important to me about this is like they read it and it's interesting that they read it and they're like, oh, I love how you do that. It's also at the end of a 1,000-word newsletter with 5 things in there that are important that we think that people need to know about, whether that's an important news story, a roundup of other people's news stories, and even if all they do is skim those 3 sentences that we write summarizing those 3 news stories, that's important. And a sports story, a fun thing that's going on in town,
a kicker.
And I think as a beat reporter, it's been important for me to recenter myself, and like people are the people that we are trying to reach are complete people. They are not just education news consumers or city hall news consumers.
They come from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And some of them may be born and raised in Minnesota. Some of them may have moved there for work. And it's definitely difficult to find like that common denominator that will something in your news article that will keep their interest. Just that's all what it's all about, isn't it? Well, Kyle, thank you for joining me
Yeah,
today here.
definitely. Thanks,
and
Charlie.
yeah,
I
it's great
appreciate it.
having you back here on CSUN where you taught. And
It's a pleasure. It's just, it's awesome to see everybody. I don't know if I'm looking at even the right camera when I say that. But
I'm looking. I know I'm looking at my right camera. Yeah. Well, thank you.
don't. If any of my students are watching this, like, don't take camera direction advice from me.
Yeah, or me. This is the very different setup from how I did my past interviews with just the two chairs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for tuning in.